Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Kim Porter. I'm the Executive Director of Be a Part of the Conversation. Tonight's program is brought to you thanks to the Montgomery County Office of Drug and Alcohol. We've been partnering with Montgomery County for a number of years now. Very, very grateful for their support. This program, Cannabis is Complicated, is part of the Youth Marijuana Prevention Project. This is our fourth in a 5-year grant cycle, and I would love to tell you that we'll have this all wrapped up in the next year, and we don't have to worry about cannabis use disorder after that. But I have a feeling we have a lot more to talk about. So this is one of our community events, but we have a few other programs associated with the YMPP project. I want you to know that you can submit any questions you have throughout the program using the chat or the Q&A. We are recording this program, but it's so good that you're here with us live because we really want your questions. We want interaction as much as possible. We miss being in person and having that engagement. So please do ask some questions of our panelists. You can follow up on tonight's program by visiting our website. Oh, and I should mention that my colleague Judy Hirsch is on as well, and she's going to be putting some links in the chat that will refer you to some of the things I'll be talking about. But the follow-up page is one of those, and that's conversation.zone/cannabis, and that's where you'll find the recording for this. Nothing's there yet, but let me get things wrapped up after tonight's program, and by tomorrow, everything will be posted. At the end of this program, a survey will pop up. We really appreciate it if you'll take just a moment to complete that survey because it helps us to know whether or not this was helpful to you, what would be more helpful to you in the future, other topics you'd like to hear about, and so on. Our organization, Be a Part of the Conversation, we're coming up on our 12th anniversary, and I can tell you that we've been very busy with programming. We have 9 community events this month. So it's been a busy time for us, but we had 57 programs in 2022. A lot of them are online. I'll tell you about one coming up that's in person that I hope you'll join us for. We also have parent partnership meetings, and we have this family recovery course. I'll tell you about those in just a moment. Our website is a huge resource of information. We have so many different kinds of links and access to podcasts and blogs and follow-up information and finding resources for treatment and all kinds of support. So I hope you'll check out our website. I did want to mention a few things that we have coming up. So on Tuesday, we'll be back on Zoom with talking about alcohol, particularly women and alcohol. We're very concerned about an increase in alcohol use among women in particular. It seemed to really start spiking in 2020. I'm sure the pandemic had quite a bit to do with this, but we'll be joined by a terrific therapist, Karen Moser, on Tuesday for that program. And then on Thursday evening, we're going to be talking about opioids and the kind of that trajectory from prescription to illicit use, but also now the implications that we have with not only fentanyl, but now xylazine. If you haven't heard about xylazine, the street name is Trank, become very problematic. It's quite deadly. It's causing wound problems and detox problems and all sorts of things. So we'll have a terrific panel with us that evening. And then on Friday next week, somebody asked this question. I really am grateful that somebody asked this, and to all of you who asked advanced questions, thank you for submitting those. But the question was, how can we get the government to understand and realize the risks surrounding THC? And boy, am I glad you asked that question, because next Friday, we will have a nationally recognized regulator expert. She is the director of the Cannabis Regulators Association. She's out of Washington State. Pennsylvania is one of the many members of the Cannabis Regulators Association. And so she's going to be talking with elected officials. So if you know anyone who is on the staff of a Pennsylvania legislator or a legislator themselves, or very interested in policy and things like that, please tell them about this next Friday, because we want them to join us. In just a moment, I'll show you our calendar link where you find out how to register for all these programs. Oh, and then the in-person program I was mentioning is on Tuesday, May 9th. We'll be at Haverford Township Library. in Delaware County. We're going to be talking about stigma and the way families and friends need to understand this disease, so that we can help to understand what's happening to our loved one or our friend. We're going to have Mike Blanche with us and some other folks. And then, Patrick Dowling will be with us again for this really important topic. Patrick's with us tonight, but he'll be joined by Ken Belden for Healing the Traumatized Family. This is such a really important topic. And I know I'm personally am a family member, and I know so many others, and we experience trauma quite often and sometimes don't even really realize it until we've had an opportunity to take a breath and see where we have landed in the midst of our loved one's substance use. And so really grateful to Patrick and Ken for joining us on May 17th on Zoom. So as I mentioned, all of these programs and more are on our calendar. That's going to be in the chat. You'll find the link there, as well as finding past content on our YouTube channel. So you can find lots of recorded programs like the one that we'll be having after tonight. Okay, so I mentioned that we have these parent partnership meetings. There are now 18 meetings called Parent Partnership that take place every week, 5 days a week. And if you visit this page on our website, you can see the green buttons are meetings that are taking place on Zoom. The purple ones are in person, and we need each other. We family members. We've been through a lot, and we need the support of one another. And we have this family recovery course. So if you are a family member who has identified that you're a child, perhaps you're a guardian or a grandparent as well, but the person that you love who has now developed a substance use disorder, you can come to this course at no charge. We're capping the course at 12 participants in each course. It's a 3-part series. It's peer led by 2 instructors who've been trained, and they're terrific. They've been through it themselves. They're our peers. And so you can learn more about that on our website as well. We have more programs, more courses that I'm going to be posting very soon on our calendar. Pretty soon, you're going to be hearing from Patrick Dowling. He's a private practice therapist, and really grateful that he's with us because he's presented on this topic for us a number of times. That's why we love to have him with us, because he's so knowledgeable. And we're especially grateful for Caden because this is his first time with us. He's a person in recovery from cannabis use, and he's going to be sharing some of his personal story. I'm going to start us off with some background because I know a lot of the questions that we got are the questions we are asked a lot. So we're going to talk about cannabis. We are not focusing on nicotine tonight, but we do have to talk about vaping just a little bit, because that really not only changed the way nicotine is delivered, especially to young people who are really not smoking cigarettes, but it has really changed the way cannabis is used. And so, when we have young people now being introduced to nicotine products that are e-cigarettes, those young people are 3 to 3.5 times more likely to report using cannabis than those who have never used an e-cigarette. So that's important to know because we might think that this is innocuous and, well, it's better than tobacco, but we really don't know that because we really don't know the long-term effects of what any of the e-juices are even doing to lungs. But certainly this has really changed the implications for cannabis use. And how do kids get vapes? Whether the vape has nicotine juice or THC oil in it, we just don't know. But where do they get them? Could be a friend or a relative. Vape shops and gas stations. We're going to talk more about some of the products that can be purchased legally in Pennsylvania. Many online vendors, you just have to kind of check this box that says, yes, I'm of legal age, and you can order things. A lot of times we caution parents about gift cards that are not to a specific store that they like, but it's like kind of one of those general Visa gift cards or PayPal account. That doesn't allow a parent to see where the charges are. So this is why we'll say, like, keep an eye out for packages that are being delivered to the home that you know what they're for. Because if kids have that kind of ability to charge things online, and they can kind of go undetected. So where we are here in Pennsylvania, you can see sort of the climate and the culture in the country right now is that we have medical marijuana legalized here. We know that we're surrounded by a lot of states that have adult use, or what's usually called as recreational cannabis or recreational marijuana. But here in PA, it's currently still just for medical use. We know that increased legalization has resulted in decreased perception of harm. And that's really changed the social norms around this. There's a reason this slide gets the most mileage of all of our slides, because it's really important to note that if we start using a substance before we're 18, we have a 1 in 4 chance of having a problem with that substance. If we wait until we're over the age of 21, that risk is reduced to 1 in 25. That's a dramatic shift. That is a greatly decreased risk if we can delay that onset of use. Just to take a look at where we are in Pennsylvania, there's a youth survey that is conducted every other year among 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders. And they kind of broke this down for us and looked at the 8th or 12th graders who vaped cannabis in the last year. And then also just looking at the number of 12th graders who reported being drunk or high at school was 18%, just to kind of give you an idea of at least what's being self-reported. I think that we have a lot of practitioners like Patrick, who's with us tonight, who might tell us that we feel the numbers might be a little bit higher. We don't know that, though. This is, again, just what's being self-reported through their schools. But if you take a look at, this is from a national study that was done, cannabis does prime the reward system, which means that it makes it a lot harder to cut back or stop using other substances. So you can see that the baseline for other substances like cigarettes, that's represented in blue. So baseline for cigarette use, binge alcohol drinking, heavy alcohol use, or other illicit substances, when used in combination with cannabis, 9 times increased use of cigarettes, almost 8 times increased binge drinking, 16% almost increased heavy alcohol use, and then almost a 10-time increase in other illicit drug use. So it does, as I said, prime that reward system. Sorry. And then when we take a look at this survey that was done about high potency THC, so when researchers are looking at high potency THC, they're talking about anything with more than 20% THC. More on that in just a moment. But this is just a survey that was done asking about high potency THC, meaning concentrates of at 39 to 95% THC, or the butane concentrates of over 90% THC. You can see that of adolescent vaping, you can see the percentage of 12th graders, you can see over here on the left, who use these high potency products in the last 30 days, we're up to 15% last year. That's a pretty alarming number to me, especially in past 30-day use. This is not lifetime use. This is just in the past 30 days. And we know that there's a lot of different ways that this can impact us. There's so many, but we can't list them all. But in the short term, you can see some of the effects here. They normally cease shortly after use, but dependency can form after long-term use, and other long-term effects can be pretty damaging. And unfortunately, a lot of these are not reversible. We don't know for sure about if their IQ points can be regained, but we don't think they are. At least the study that was done in New Zealand says that they would not, cannot be, but they are showing an up to an 8-point decrease in IQ. Amotivational syndrome, I think, is especially important to talk about because of the fact that when somebody is amotivational, they're not very likely to want to get help for what's making them feel depressed or anxious or all the things that they might be self-medicating for. We also know that cannabis, there's a lot of myths out there like, oh, it's not addictive. It absolutely can be addictive, much like many other substances. And approximately 3 out of 10 people will develop a cannabis use disorder if they are using cannabis regularly. There's a dramatic increase, though, when you start using, as I said earlier, in those younger years. Another myth kind of out there that is that there are no withdrawal symptoms. There absolutely are, particularly if you're using pretty high potency or with pretty good regularity. The more you smoke, the more your brain depends on that supply. So when you stop, you have to adjust to not having it in your system. So it can be very intense. You might want to use again because you're experiencing some of these really unpleasant symptoms. You just want to feel better. And now you're convinced that the cannabis makes you feel better because you're having all these symptoms. And these withdrawal symptoms can last for up to 2 weeks. There is a term that not a lot of people are familiar with, which is greening out. This is sort of a comparison to blacking out. So greening out means you're toxic from cannabis. You've had too much cannabis and you're basically, another myth, you can't overdose. Well, people often associate the word overdose with death. You can overdose on alcohol. You can overdose on a lot of things. Your body starts to have reactions to it if you've had too much and you're not able to process it properly with in your bloodstream or in your brain or whatever. So you can have some of these symptoms that are referred to as greening out. And there's also something, you see the nausea and vomiting here. There's something called cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome that we're hearing more and more about with school nurses and with emergency departments who have people coming in who've been using a lot of cannabis and now they're vomiting uncontrollably. That's what hyperemesis means. They don't really fully understand why this is happening. They also don't understand why the comfort people get tends to be a hot shower or bath. And actually now they're finding that if you use capsaicin cream, which is a cream that's used for sore joints, muscle pain, that sort of thing, that if capsaicin cream is put on the stomach, that seems to help stop with the vomiting. And now emergency departments are starting to keep that on hand when patients come in with this, kind of repetitive dry heaves and vomiting. They're very dehydrated. So the cannabis plant has so many chemicals in it, and the two that are most interesting that we talk the most about in this world are CBD and THC. CBD does not get someone high. You see CBD in so many products now. They're in, pharmacies and everywhere else in topical ointments and all sorts of things. There's very likely some medicinal value here, but we don't fully know yet what that might be or what any of the adverse effects might be. We do have a prescribed medication called Epidiolex, which is for intractable seizure disorders, and they're very rare in young children. But that is an FDA-approved medication that is derived from pure CBD. So nobody's getting high from that. Nobody is smoking Epidiolex. THC, however, is the psychoactive ingredient. This is what gets people high. And the concentration is really changing. That's what we're going to talk about in a moment. But depending on the strain or the potency or your own brain chemistry, it can present itself in very different ways. It could be a stimulant, a depressant, a hallucinogen. It just responds very differently depending on the type, the potency, the delivery, and our own, or the way our own brain processes these things. So the way it presents can look very different. That was another one of the questions was, how do I know? What are the signs? There are some signs that I mentioned that are in those short-term, long-term effects, but it varies dramatically. It can look very different for different people because of these different ways that it's delivered. And, it certainly doesn't look like it did back in my day, in my 60s, and it did not look like this on even this plant product on the left certainly didn't look like that. And, today is 420. And if you aren't aware, that has been kind of known, at least in this country, as Marijuana Day. And it's no accident that we chose to have this. We thought, we'll just lean into it and talk about cannabis on Marijuana Day. So there are all kind of urban myths about where 420 came from. I heard it was a California statute. There's a 420 that means like cannabis possession or something, but whatever, 420 is the day, 420 is the time of day. But this is why it's so important to be up to speed on this stuff, because now July 10th is sort of another cannabis day, and that's because 710 is oil upside down. And where does oil come from? These are concentrates. So if you take a look at the dried plant, the THC levels in the plant, and as I said, THC is the psychoactive ingredient, were very low back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. But the average that the plant can get to today is around 13% for the average. And through hybridization and so forth, it's gotten up to about 30% THC is the highest potency they've gotten in the plant itself. However, when you concentrate the plant and get these oils and extracts from it, that potency can go up to, actually this says 80%, it's really more like 85, 90%, even we've seen 95% THC. So this is an entirely different substance. Edibles are a very different challenge because we it takes longer to metabolize because it's going through the digestive system. So when you smoke cannabis, you feel high almost immediately, but when you eat it, you're taking longer to get that psychoactive effect. So you might think, well, I'm not really feeling this. So you eat some more. Now you might be experiencing some of that greening out because you're feeling sick because you've had too much. And also the fact that edibles look like candy. So for young people that have access to it, don't think they're getting something that has THC, we know that in states where edibles are legal, which they're not currently in PA, but they're here. But where it's legal, we know that kids are getting their hands on them and they're ending up in the emergency department quite sick from this. So just another glimpse at potency. These are some of the different terms that you hear about from the concentrates. The dried flower you see again at the top, 10 to 30%, but you can see that it really does dramatically rise. And here's what some of the products look like now. So it really and truly has changed. We have to think differently. This is not Cheech and Chong anymore. Things have really progressed. The hemp plant has really complicated things for us with legality because hemp has a lot of great benefits. It's used in construction, like it makes concrete stronger. So there are a lot of reasons that there was legislation passed called the Farm Bill that says that if the hemp is a cannabis plant, but hemp, that strain has less than 0.3% THC in it. So that was made legal through the Farm Bill so that it could be grown and cultivated and used for all these varieties of products that don't have anything to do with getting high. However, the cannabis industry has figured out a way to concentrate that. And so now we have products that are legal currently everywhere pretty much because they are derived from the hemp plant. But by concentrating, again, that THC, we now have Delta 8 and Delta 10 THC. So if you're over 21 and you go into a vape shop or a gas station, you'll find these products and they come in forms like these oils that can be used with a vape pen. You can see it down here. You'll also find something, kratom is not cannabis, but I'm just mentioning it because it's also found in a lot of vape shops. This is another psychoactive plant. This is coming from Thailand. Mostly it comes in pill form or powder form. Some people make teas out of it. It has been showing to have a lot of deleterious effects. So people are getting addicted to it and having some problems with it. It's kind of more of a sedative effect. But just want to make you aware because I know these signs are up everywhere. Cannabis Delta 8, kratom, Delta 10, sold here. And some of the things that can be purchased online, again, just being cautious about those online sales, could be THC, could be CBD, but those products, again, are not looking like they used to be. So just a word about medical marijuana. It was legalized here in Pennsylvania in 2016 and was available for sale in 2018. I can tell you more about, I know people often have questions about how old you have to be, and then you need a caregiver and all that. You must be at least 21 to be a caregiver. But if you're under the age of 18, you need a caregiver to get the medical marijuana for you. If there are questions about it, I'm happy to circle back to this, but I'll just move on to tell you that we have 4% roughly of Pennsylvanians who have a medical marijuana card currently. 6% are currently enrolled in the program. They may not have an active card, but they're enrolled. Most states have about 2% of their population enrolled, so we're a bit above the curve right there. 2,000 physicians are approved to certify them with a card. We have 168 that might need to be updated, medical marijuana dispensaries. And these are the forms that are available in the dispensaries. We do not, as I said, have edible cannabis at this point. There are 23 conditions that can qualify someone for a medical marijuana card. And the 4 that we have been told are the most often identified are these 4: anxiety, opioid use disorder, PTSD, and intractable pain. And the medical societies associated with these disorders none of these medical societies have approved medical marijuana for these conditions. So there is no endorsement of these products that are being sold in the medical marijuana dispensaries. Just want to make that note because I think there's a bit of a false sense of safety that, well, it's medicine, but it's actually not medicine. It's not available in a pharmacy. There's no actual prescription for it. There's a card that allows you to go to a dispensary where you can choose with the help of a bud tender in the dispensary to get the products that you think would be helpful to you. Conversely, we are seeing problems arise with cannabis use with these psychiatric conditions, including psychosis, schizophrenia, also with anxiety and depression. So we're not exactly sure yet if it's correlation or causation, but there's growing evidence that it is causation that's actually acting as a catalyst for things like schizophrenia and psychosis, so that if there's a family history, if there are underlying traits, that this might actually kind of move the needle for us, unfortunately. So just a note about the language around this. Recreational use is usually what is referred to when we talk about legalization, but would really prefer to use the term adult use. So if we can change that language, I think, because it just sounds like too much fun when we talk about recreational use. So what can parents of teens do, especially if you are a parent with us who has a teenager? I'm sure you're hearing a lot about this. If you're with us tonight, I'm sure you have a lot of questions. So, we can have really clear boundaries, like this is not okay with us, or whatever your parameters are. And I know Patrick is going to talk a lot more about this, but here are just a few tips. I'm not going to read them off to you, and again, this is all going to be on our website as a follow-up, but you can definitely have some really meaningful conversations with kids and not look like I did when I found out my son was getting high. I looked a lot like this mom, very upset, just started right into the lecture mode. And I wish I knew this acronym back then, which is WAIT, stands for why am I talking? I really needed to just get curious and ask some questions that were not accusatory or judgmental, but just open and looking for some ways that I could support my son when he was going through all the things he was going through as a teenager. There are a lot of things that Patrick will talk to you about, but addressing social norms is a good thing. We know that not everyone is getting high, despite what our children might tell us. I heard a lot of that, like, oh, everybody is doing this. No, not actually true. They're not all getting high, but we like to believe that we're, with people who are like-minded and validate our choices. And so that's often the perception that kids have. Role playing is a great thing to do with kids, just to say like, hey, if you don't want to do this and you're feeling some pressure, even just by being around it, you can kind of talk through exactly what you would say in a situation when you're at a party or something. That could even be with a friend. If they don't want to talk role play with their mom or dad, who's your friend that's got your back, that you're going to be at a social function with, that you feel like you can kind of play act like how you're going to respond if somebody offers you something that you're really not interested in using. We can talk more about the gateway argument. I know somebody asked this question. I love what one of our past panelists shared. She's a person in recovery, and she said, when asked this question, she said, I think getting high is a gateway to getting high. If I try something that alters my mood and I like the way it feels, I'll probably try it again. And I could possibly ultimately want more of it. And if at some point it's not getting me high anymore, making me feel different, then I'm going to try something else or at a higher potency. So that was a good way to put it. We don't want to sensationalize this. If we're calling it, the devil's botany and make sure you stay away from this. I mean, if we sound like we are very black and white about this and are not open to understanding why someone is curious about it, we're going to lose an opportunity for conversation. So we also don't want to demonize its use. So if we know a loved one, a neighbor, a family member, whatever, is using cannabis, that's their choice. They could be an adult doing this. It could be completely, appropriate for them. Who knows? But we don't want to make judgment about it, because again, that shuts down conversations with kids. If they want to come to us with a question or a concern about an older sibling or something, we want them to feel that we're not going to make a judgment or punish them for even talking about it. And we can't scare kids. We absolutely cannot scare a child, and using scare tactics has never been proven to work. That's why I have a couple of citations just to make that point. And, most of us are aware that our brain is not fully developed until we're about 25 years old. But I don't like to use that language with kids. I'd like to say instead that what a great opportunity we have when we're young. We had when we were young to create really healthy brain chemistry and to create those pathways, learning how to manage our stress, to manage the challenges that life throws at us. So what fires together wires together. So let's make those healthy connections. So I'm going to end with that and stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Patrick. I went a little over. Sorry about that, Patrick.
You're fine. No worries. So my name is Patrick Dowling. I'm a licensed professional counselor in Pennsylvania. Most of the work that I do is around family systems, families who are dealing with an issue via substance use issues, mental health issues, or a combination thereof. My degrees in marriage and family therapy, and my background is I've worked in addiction for over 20 years. I've been in recovery for 26 years, almost 27 years. So I've been working in private practice for about 6 or 7 years now. And first off, I just want to say thank you for the folks who have jumped on. Thank you for being an active parent. Thank you for consuming this kind of programming. I think it's super important for families and parents to be informed consumers about what's happening in the climate right now, especially for adolescents, young adults. So I want to talk a little bit about what I see most commonly in my practice. One of the things I wanted to just address right off the bat is that often I see parents coming in or young adults or adolescents coming in, and parents feel like they don't have sufficient power or influence to help create safety for their kids. And I do want to just highlight something, that parents actually have the most influence over teens, adolescents, young adults. It may not feel like that's true, but Kim, you and I, we all did some programming at Hatboro High School, and I'm sure you remember, we asked the kids, and it was about 40, 50 kids, and we asked them to rank the things that are most important to them in their lives. And universally, relationship with parents was the most important. It was pretty staggering to see these sophomores, juniors, seniors with all the things on their mind. Academics, sports, friendships, college, all this stuff, right? Universally, it was their relationship with their parents and their family. So I do want to just highlight that parents do have the most influence over what's happening with your kids. So thank you again for being, at this program and participating in this. So one of the things I want to just talk about is one of the things that I see in my work is what I would call the structural breakdown of a family system, meaning that sometimes the least qualified person has the most power, which is really common when there's a mental health or a substance use issue, is because mental health issues and substance use issues are what we call feedback resistant, right? So if we just talked in a general sense about addiction, there's 11 criteria for addiction. Only 2 of those have anything to do with how much and how often somebody uses a drug or a drink or whatever it is, right? 9 of the 11 criteria for substance use disorder have to do with not listening to what the world is telling you about that substance and your relationship to it, meaning that person is starting to have some kind of conflict with their support system, interpersonal conflict. They may have some conflict with the legal system. They're having some feedback loop around decreased performance at school, work, social engagements, decreasing activity with hobbies, interests, fun, things that they do just for the fun of it. Also, their health is starting to give them some feedback, not feeling as good. Maybe their lungs are hurting, or their doctor has said something to them and they blow that off, or maybe don't accurately report to their physician. So again, 9 of the 11 criteria for addiction have to do with that person not listening to what their world is telling them about how their substance use is affecting their life and affecting their decisions. Things like putting themselves in danger, operating equipment, driving under the influence, right? Things that when people are, quote, in their right mind, they wouldn't do, or they'd say, boy, this seems like this substance and my relationship to it is putting me in a bad spot, and it's causing me to make bad decisions. So if we know that that potentiality is there, that a mental health issue, a substance use issue can create what we call feedback resistance, what that means is they become a pain in the butt. They're not listening, right? You got to tell them a lot of times the same thing. They're not hearing it. And so they are obstinate, they are determined, they're going to continue to persist in doing this thing, even though you're giving them feedback that that's not working, that's not acceptable, that's not a good behavior. Our children live in the shelter of our responsible decisions. They get to live in safe homes, they get to go to good schools, they get to have, healthy, safe, food to eat. They get to live within the shelter of these responsible decisions. And I find that sometimes because of the mental health issue or a lack of resiliency, that the family system starts allowing the least responsible person, the least capable person to have the most power because they're difficult. Because it's easier to not have that fight. It's easier to not address that issue. It's easier in the moment, not define your boundaries, not ask your children or require that they honor your value system. So one of the things that I encourage parents to do is, number one, define your boundaries, define your values, define what's important to you, define what will help you sleep at night, knowing that you're doing your job as a parent, that you're creating safety. And there's this really interesting false dilemma that happens, that parents sometimes think, if I want to have a good relationship with my kid, I have to kind of allow them to do these things that I don't think are a good idea, or I have to turn a blind eye, or I have to allow this in order to maintain an open, safe, trusting relationship with my kid. I have to kind of allow them to do things that I don't think are a good idea. I actually think it's the opposite. I think when we allow our kids to do things that we don't agree with and don't fit into our value system, and we silently or explicitly endorse it, I think we actually lose trust. I think they trust us less because they see that we're not honoring our values, and we're now giving a 15, 16, 17-year-old who's still figuring out what's going on and how the world works the most power, which they don't know how to wield yet. Right. So we have the least qualified person sometimes driving the bus. They're not qualified to drive the bus. We as adults, we as parents are qualified to drive the bus with collaboration, with information, with the benefit of experience, and hiring smart people and following suggestions. So I think the first thing I ask parents to do is define your values. Sometimes parents are reluctant to ask their children to honor their value system because they're afraid that they will lose. And the kid's going to choose XYZ behavior over the relationship with the parents and the parents' value system. I think that if we're afraid to ask our kids and require our kids to honor our value system, we've already lost. Because we're not fighting for it and we're not asking. If you want a raise from your boss and you don't ask for it, you're probably not going to get it. Right. So I think part of this is define your values, define what's important to you. And then the work is being ready to stand behind it. And the second thing that I ask parents to do is trust your kid to be a kid. Trust that they're going to sometimes want what they want. They're going to want shiny things. They're going to want the next exciting thing. They're going to want to fit in. They're going to want to have the next thing or the next experience, or they're going to chase stuff, right? That's part of adolescence, is trying and experimenting and trying on new behaviors and new, ways of dressing and friendships and new things, right? And I think our job is also to set up some guardrails that help create and maintain safety. So that necessarily means that there's going to be some healthy friction. The third thing that I ask parents to do, or encourage parents to do, is trust yourself to be the parent. That's the job, is to set the healthy boundary, to hold the healthy boundary, and to most importantly, be popular with yourself. I think if you're extremely popular with a 16-year-old, maybe you're not doing it right. Meaning you may be just giving them everything they want. And that may or may not be good for them. I think you can be extremely popular with a 5-year-old if you just give them cookies for dinner every night, but that doesn't mean you're parenting effectively. That just means they get a lot of sugar from you and they like that you give them a lot of sugar, right? May not like you when they're throwing up at midnight, right? But I think part of our job is to define our values and stand in that and ask our kids to honor that. My concern is usually when I'm brought into the mix, there's been a process of not honoring that value system. And there's been some behavioral learning that kids don't have to listen to their parents. They don't have to take them seriously. When parents set a boundary, they don't honor it. So the kid's thinking, all right, they might like get on me about this, but like eventually they're going to cave, right? Because they have before, or maybe they just hope it goes away, or they're not really going to require that I honor whatever the agreement is. So I was thinking about this today, and it almost sounds like one of those news feeds, like, here's what a trainer eats, right? I'll tell you what my policy is. I have a 17-year-old. My wife and I are both in long-term recovery. We have a policy via the genetic risk factors, given the culture with THC, is we have a policy on the front end that we reserve the right to test our kid under suspicion or just randomly. And that if there's a positive test, the car that person, my daughter works for her car, she pays for her 50% of her car, that the car sits until you pass a drug test. And we have lots of conversations and/or counseling if that comes up. But that was an upfront agreement that we have a zero tolerance policy. That's just us. And if there's a positive test, the car sits, and/or we start restricting some of her liberties, because what has been demonstrated is that she's not managing it well or making good decisions that we feel set her up for success. And we personally feel obligated to give her the longest runway possible without mood altering substances, so that she can then make whatever decisions she wants or needs to make in adulthood. So that's just our value system. And I'm not giving that to anybody else. I'm just telling you that's where we've landed. And I'm okay with being unpopular. If she doesn't like that, I'm okay with being popular with me. Knowing that I stand behind, and we stand behind our value system. So my concern is I would rather deal with that, nip it in the bud, than deal with that issue when it's this big. And maybe that's the first time I really hold a line. And sometimes I frankly see parents who the first time they're really holding a line is, you need to go to inpatient treatment. And I think, oh man, like this is big stakes now. Like now we're holding the line, maybe really for the first time, and it's really big stakes. And maybe if that line had got held earlier, we might not be in this place. We might be there anyway, right? Depends on how feedback resistant or how invested somebody is in their substance use, and or, resistant to feedback. But I'm a big fan of prevention. If we can address that issue on the front end and create an environment that's conducive to honoring your value system, let's do that now. Because frankly, if there is an addiction, we're going to have to do that work anyway, and it's going to be a lot harder. Meaning that work will still need to happen around honoring your value system as parents and helping create safety, whether your kid likes it or not, and honoring what you need to do to be able to sleep at night. So, cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. Kim, you mentioned that. I can tell you a quick story. I was doing an intervention several years ago, and we had an intervention plan for a Sunday, and the 21-year-old kid got arrested in Westchester, drunken disorderly assault. So we said, great, let's do the intervention at the jail. So we moved the intervention up to Saturday, and my man had not had a good night. He was coming out of jail. So we had about half the intervention squad there. We met in an intervention room, and the kid was literally covered in feces. He was not having a good night. And we said, look, here's the deal. You can go to treatment or you're on your own. Parents, had to find their bottom lines. And driving this kid up to treatment, he's thrown up in my car like 30 times, drive heaving and all that. We're giving him water just so he has something to throw up. We get him the treatment, and they say, hey, look, you got to go get him stabilized. We go drive him to a hospital. And he'd been smoking high concentrate THC. This is like the 6th time this young man had experienced cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. And it would go on for 2-3 days sometimes. So he's thrown up in my car. get him in the emergency room, they get him medicated, get him his central nervous system slowed down. He doesn't throw up for about half an hour. We're getting wrapped up, ready to take him to treatment. And I said to him, hey man, it doesn't have to be like this. Like, life doesn't have to be like this. You just got a drunken disorder. You got to fight with your girlfriend. You just got arrested. You're covered in feces and you're throwing up 30 times in my car. Like, this doesn't sound like a good deal. And I said, it could be better than this. He goes, I'm pretty happy. I was like, oh God. I said, dude, I've seen happy and this isn't what it looks like. You're failing out of school. You just got legal charges. This is not what winning looks like, right? That is how powerful sometimes THC can be, is your whole world is falling down around you and you think, man, I'm like, things are cool. Like, I'm all right? Totally devoid of, an attachment to what was really going on in his world, right? I've also seen quite a few cases of, I think marijuana is a really great drug at helping you suck at life. It's totally amotivational, totally demotivating. I was going to talk about a little more about that, but I didn't feel like it. I'm just kidding. That's a joke. But I've seen so many kids with so much potential. And the problem is weed works. Weed works. It makes people feel the way they want to feel in the short term. Potato chips work great too, right? But we all know how that goes, right? So weed is a really effective drug in the short term of mood modification and helping people feel the way they want to feel. The challenge is it doesn't really resolve anything, right? If anything, it kind of creates problems. It demotivates people, and it's enough of a relief valve to keep people from meaningfully solving their problem. So if we were to think about medical marijuana as a corollary to like an antidepressant, right? When people are severely depressed and they engage in a pharmaceutical solution, right? Like an antidepressant, part of the goal of that antidepressant is to get them out of the rut, get them out of the rut sufficiently that they can start doing the behavioral and attitudinal adjustments to sustain putting depression in remission or remediating the effects, right? So that antidepressant is not going to cure your depression most times, right? It's really just about getting you out of that rut so that you can then do the behavioral things that help create wellness, safety, resiliency, and help create the ability to thrive. My concern about medical marijuana in general, especially when it's prescribed for anxiety, is it works in the short term. All abusable drugs create the symptoms they're intended to treat, right? So marijuana, usually people use it to mellow out. The side effect or the withdrawal symptoms of that are irritability and depression and increased anxiety, right? That's creating this effect, and then you get a rebound effect. Alcohol helps people mellow out, but then the withdrawal symptoms is increased blood pressure, heart rate, irritability, right? Opiates, same thing. That's about relieving the symptoms of pain. Doesn't really relieve pain, right? So you get relief, but then on the back end, people have increased pain sensitivity. So all drugs of abuse on a back end actually create the symptom that they're intended to treat. Cannabis is no different. It creates the ability to feel the way you want to feel, but it's just enough of a relief valve that people don't get the critical mass or what's called escape velocity and actually solve the problem of what's causing their distress. Is it an internal issue, an external issue, something they need to do something about to create a more positive outcome? So my experience has been that when people are using cannabis consistently, they don't build up sufficient motivation to actually solve the problem. And then they kind of get damned to a life of just kind of skimming along and or getting worse and or decreased self-efficacy and decreased competence, and not being able to develop a sense of mastery and competency and positive expectancy of self. So I think that, if I could leave you with one thing, I think that part of what I would hope that parents would do is get really clear about what is acceptable to them, what they can endorse and what they can't, and stand behind that. A boundary is only a boundary if it's a clear line, and then there are consequences if it's met, and there's consequences if it's not met. If you have a boundary that does not have a consequence, that is not a boundary, right? So a boundary has to have a consequence to it being met or unmet, right? And what we say to our kid is, hey kid, keep making great decisions, autonomy, 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 like go, right? Keep doing what you're doing. When you start making decisions that demonstrate that we are not able to trust your judgment, we're going to start pulling that autonomy back in reference to how well you're managing your ability to self-determine. So I think, these groups, counseling are great opportunities to get really clear about where your integrity lies. How do you maintain your integrity? I just want to look at my notes real quick and see if I'm missing anything. Let's see. The one thing I just want to highlight is distress tolerance is incredibly important as a determining factor of success in life. My primary concern with marijuana is it decreases distress tolerance. It decreases people's ability to stick to it and do hard things and learn and grow. I always say the path of least resistance always leads downhill. And if people are seeking the path of least resistance, they're kind of setting the clock that they're going to be heading downhill into less and less opportunities. But when they demonstrate the ability to persevere and do hard things, that demonstrates that they're qualified to handle more and more challenges in life and more autonomy. So I want to be mindful of time. I appreciate the opportunity to be with everybody tonight, and happy to, if there's questions at the end, we can address those. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Patrick. I'm sure that we'll get to you when we get to the Q&A for sure. So Caden, thank you so much for being with us. If you want to unmute and share your experience with us, we appreciate it.
Cool. Hi, I'm Caden. I'm an alcoholic. I know I say alcoholic and this is mostly about weed, but they're very, very, I use them both equally in my story, and weed for sure. I don't know personally how I feel about the gateway drug, but it definitely led me down a dark path. And I would also just like to say that everything I say tonight is simply my experience, both in addiction and now 9.5 months in recovery. So I'll kind of just start from the beginning, I guess. So I grew up, I'm from Connecticut, suburban town. Two loving parents, had everything I ever wanted and needed. A brother, public school my whole life. And pretty normal childhood by all, pretty normal childhood overall. And, as I grew up and got into middle school, I started to kind of feel like I was missing something in my life. I always wanted to, growing up, I was always the kid that picked glass and kickball, got by in school just fine. I tried, never a cool kid. And starting in sort of around 7th grade, that's when things really started to change for me. I was unhappy with where I was in life and unhappy with the people I was surrounding myself with, unhappy with essentially everyone's opinion of me. I wanted to be liked. And because of that, I started dropping all of my childhood friends and, sit at the cool kids table per se, and started doing things that I thought would change others' perspective of me to make me feel accepted. That's what I wanted. I wanted to feel accepted by everyone else because I was not comfortable in my own skin. I was not happy in my own skin. And 7th grade, I got drunk for the first time. I was 12. It wasn't off to the races by any means. But after I drank for the first time, I was drinking maybe once a month, once every 2 months, something like that. So the time I have now is by far the longest I've had sober since I was 11. And nothing special, honestly. I know you talked very briefly about nicotine or vaping more specifically. I started vaping the same night I got drunk for the first time, and that was definitely off to the races. I did anything in my power to get Juuls. Those were the most popular thing when I was in 7th grade, and I'm sure a lot of you know about those. So did anything in my power to get Juul and start trying to have my brother get me the pods or whatever possible. and I will just say this real quick, because I know it was touched on. They sell Delta 8s in gas station. They sell all sorts of nicotine products in gas stations. They sell the actual battery device for the THC carts in gas stations. And yes, you have to be 21, but there is always a way of getting them. My older brother, friends of my older brother, old friends I met, or a lot of places they just don't care and they'll sell it to you anyway, which was definitely the case in my situation. I knew of several gas stations, and as I got older, several liquor stores that didn't card me. And it's a sad fact, but it's true, is that a lot of places will just sell it to you. They don't care. They want the money. Yeah. So like I said, nothing crazy once I first started drinking. Then high school came around, and this is sort of where my story really kicks off. Smoked for the first time beginning of my freshman year of high school, and that was it for me. I almost immediately was getting high every single day in school, every single day after school, whatever means possible, spending every cent I had on, again, like mentioned, the carts. That was the first time I ever got high was off a cart, a 90% THC cart. And again, normal cannabis nowadays has around 30% THC in it. And first thing I got high off of, and what I was getting high off of every day, contains 90 to 95% THC. I very, very quickly grew a tolerance to it. I would hit it in the morning when I woke up, and that was typically the only time during the day that I would actually get high off of it. After that, I would typically hit it probably 4 to 5 times more a day, and not just one hit, but hitting it multiple times. And I typically wouldn't get high off of it, but of course I didn't notice at the time, but I was already. They say you can't be chemically addicted to it, but I don't know. Like I said, this is just my experience. Like, I couldn't go without hitting it. I had to hit it, and I was using whatever means possible to get outside of myself. So I was hitting it several times a day and trying to escape myself. Yeah, so that continued on until sophomore year when I got into a relationship with a girl. And the first 8 months of that relationship, I was continuing to do the same old things that I used to do or was doing before. And then she broke up with me, and I became extremely codependent. Within 24 hours, we were back together, and I swore off all substances. And by the way, I was drinking, but very, very rarely. When I sort of first started, once I found weed, I liked that a lot more because when I drank, I couldn't control myself. When I smoked, I was perfectly in control of myself, just relaxed. But it still gave me that sort of out of body experience, I guess you could say. So swore off all substances, didn't go well. But I made it about 2 months without using anything. And then slowly I began to rationalize why I should be able to use it. So then it became a month, and then it was every 2 weeks, and then it was only on weekends. And then once again, I was using pretty much daily. So that relationship lasted for almost 2 years. And then by the time, once we broke up, that really set me off. Like I said, I was using almost daily again. I was smoking almost daily again. And that very quickly wasn't enough. That slowly, which is sort of where the alcohol comes into my story, that very quickly wasn't enough. And I slowly began to drink more and more. I was drinking a beer or a couple beers in the morning, which at this time wouldn't even really do anything to me, but that's when the chemical addiction sort of started to kick off. And continuously just smoking throughout the day, despite the fact that it rarely ever did anything to me anymore at this point, because my tolerance had gotten so high. And I should mention, by the way, especially during my freshman year, one of the main reasons that I didn't smoke actual weed often was because my mom was she was a bloodhound. And if I had the slightest whiff of weed on me, I would get in trouble. And I got in trouble a lot. Which I guess definitely would consider that sort of started my That's sort of like what kicked off my depression, was just constantly getting in trouble, constantly not being allowed to do what I wanted to do, constantly not allowed to go to this party, constantly not allowed to have a sleepover, them searching my room, whatever it may be. And um, so that's why I used the carts, is because they don't smell. You could blow, if you blow it out into the air and then you walk in, you're going to smell it. But if you blow it out a window or you blow it, there's no lingering smell. It doesn't stick like a cigarette. It doesn't stick like a vape. The smell just goes away, and it makes it extremely easy to hide it. I'd have that right next to my eye drops. I'd put eye drops in, and then as long as I didn't have to have a full blown conversation with you, I was pretty fine. I could just lay in my bed or play Xbox. And I guess that's actually a good point to bring up, is just when you are high, you do not want to talk to your parents specifically. If it's your buddies, it's a whole other story, but completely disconnected from my family when I started smoking weed. Spent as much time away from them as possible, had as little conversations as possible with them. I didn't want to see them. I didn't want to be near them. I wanted to be in my own world, in my own head, just completely out of myself. And yeah, so I guess I'll bring it back now. So started drinking more and more and more, getting continuously smoking throughout the day. And it got to a point where beer wasn't enough for me anymore. And I guess I'll mention this too on kind of like the gateway. Like I said, I don't know how I personally feel about that, but for me, it wasn't necessarily a gateway, but because of whatever was going on in my brain, the effects of weed weren't enough for me anymore. She mentioned greening out. I've greened out once in my life. You don't want it. Like it sucks. You just kind of like fall asleep, to be honest. And the effects of weed weren't enough for me anymore. They weren't getting me outside of myself. I was still fully conscious while smoking weed. It was just like a little sensation, especially because my tolerance had grown so high. So this is what sort of kicked off my drinking, because I needed something to do more to me. So I started drinking heavier and heavier. What started off as a liter, I was drinking maybe a quarter of that. And again, your tolerance just slowly builds up, especially in my case. And I do have family members in recovery, which kind of leads me to believe that I was genetically disposed to this. And again, I'm no science major here, but from what I've heard, people who are genetically disposed to this can essentially, where some people will drink normally and then eventually they kind of get to a point where they're just like, I want to stop. That's not the case for me. I drink and I drink and I drink and I drink until I can't drink anymore. So what started off as a couple shots and quarter of a liter became half a liter, and then eventually I was killing a whole bottle every single night. And that continued on for a long time. Eventually it actually sort of became more than that, but I was pretty broke at this point. And back to the stores part, I was the guy at the liquor store that I used to go to right down the street from me. He was actually fronting me money when I couldn't afford to. I should also mention I'm 19. So I was 18 at the time of when my drinking was the worst. And, I used to go to the same guy every single night, 5 minutes down the road from my house. And it got to the point where a lot of nights I wouldn't be able to afford it. So he would just front me the money. Constantly stealing money from my parents, constantly stealing money from my brother. I was pawning things that I owned to get money, the little coin bins or whatever. I'm going to Stop and Shop to turn those in, anything possible to get the money to buy the booze, because I could not go a single night without it. I could not go a single night without getting outside of myself, outside of my thinking, I wanted to numb the emotion, numb the pain. And then eventually it just got so bad that I didn't even want to, I just wanted to turn the lights out. So towards the end, I was drinking to blackout. I wasn't drinking to get tipsy. I didn't even like parties, because when I was at parties, I had to control my drinking and not make a fool of myself. But when I was alone in my bedroom at 2:00 in the morning on a Tuesday night, I could drink and drink and drink and drink all I wanted until I passed out in bed. And that continued for majority of my senior year of high school. And then finally, I'd gone, I should mention too, I drank and drove. Like eventually the line just becomes blurred. You know, you start out by drinking with a couple beers in your system, thinking you're going to be okay, then drink tipsy. And then when you get to the point that I was at in my addiction, you're driving with one eye closed and you don't even, it's, it got to the point where I was rarely ever driving sober. Um, the line just gets so blurry. And when you're in when you're addicted to a substance, you don't even care. You don't care what the consequences of it are. You just want what you want, and you want it now. You want to get high, you want to get drunk. You don't care who gets hurt in your way, and you just leave a wake of destruction in your path. So eventually I did my nightly routine, went to the liquor store about 10 minutes before it closed, got my bottle, went back home, started drinking, and went to, I don't even know where I was going, maybe a gas station or something like that. But I got to the bottom of my street. My brother gives me a call. He knew I was drinking. Something clicked. He was screaming at me to turn back, and something clicked in me to turn around and go back. And for some reason I did. That rarely ever happened, but I had listened for some reason. And I turned back, I actually climbed up the chimney because I didn't want to confront him, right back into my room where I knew my bottle was hiding. Except when I got there, he had taken my bottle. And I went downstairs in a complete rage. He wouldn't tell me where it was, so I started threatening to hit him with my parents had removed all the alcohol in the house at this point, except for the decorative wine. So I started grabbing all those and said I would just drink this if you're not going to give me my bottle. And eventually was threatening him with physical violence. Was threatening to smash one of the bottles over his head. And he eventually told me where it was. I got it, went to go drink it, and something, again, I don't know what it was, but something clicked in me. It was like, the depression had gotten so bad of just sitting in my room in complete and utter misery, not being able to sit with my own thoughts at night. So I just caved for a second and poured the bottle out, had the most serious conversation I've ever had with my brother. And for the next week, I tried my very hardest to not drink. I tried everything. I started cooking. Started trying in school. I built a garden. Anything in my power to make me happy, because there was a hole inside of me and I could not fill it with anything. So I just tried and I tried. I started working out again. I tried and I just didn't. I wasn't happy. There was something missing inside of me, and I always filled it for the past 4 to 6 years of my life with a bottle. And eventually that week went on. I was completely miserable, and the weekend came around and I again rationalized in my head that I'm good to go. I made it a week without drinking and this is fine. I could drink. So again, did my nightly routine, got a bottle of Jim Beam, and went back to my house, started drinking it around 3 a.m, laying on my couch watching Mission Impossible. And then this was on June 12th. The cops knocked on my parents' door at 5 a.m. and told them that their son had been in an accident and he was on his way to Yale New Haven Hospital. I don't ever remember getting off the couch. I guess I don't even remember drinking. Really. Next thing I knew, I just woke up in the hospital being held down by 8 security guards and doctors because I was fighting them all off. So, my mom couldn't even come in the hospital to see me because she was so terrified. And I guess I should also mention, for probably the last year of my drinking, my mom was on antidepressants and sleep medication because she was so scared that her boy was going to die in the room next to them. So woke up in the hospital. This was also the week of my high school graduation. yeah, so I woke up in the hospital and then convinced them. A couple days later, they had an intervention with me and said, "You're either going to rehab or we're not paying for your college and you're never driving again." Um, but I wasn't ready to give up on substances yet. So I told them that's not happening. You know, I'll make it. I'll find a way. Um, and then here's the power of weed. I wasn't smoking at the time. I'd actually gone absent from smoking. I was just drinking because I had to pass a drug test for my job that I wanted to have over the summer. So my logic was, if I say yes to going to rehab, that means I'm not going to this job, which means I could smoke. So I convinced them to give me 2 weeks, 3 weeks before they sent me to rehab, just so I can smoke and drink for the next 3 weeks. By the way, don't do that. It's a terrible idea. I finagled my parents into doing it. It's an awful idea. I could have gotten drunk again and taken one of my parents' cars. Don't do it. Yeah, but so July 5th, 2022, I went to High Watch Recovery Center in Connecticut and spent 30 days there. And for the first night, and I can't even tell you how many years, I went to sleep at peace. I don't know how many of you have heard of a pink cloud, but essentially it's like when you first get sober and you're like all like really happy. That was me. Like for the first 2 months of my sobriety, I was just unbelievably happy. And so I was there for a month, and then I moved to Pennsylvania in a recovery house. And I'm currently living in a step down house of that program and attending Westchester University it's my first semester in college ever. And it's pretty crazy to be doing it sober, especially when there's a frat there, more back there. And I want to talk about my family a little bit too, because I know I mentioned my mom and my dad, and I'd completely destroyed the relationship with them, and they had zero trust in me. I caused my parents so much pain, having to watch my mom cry almost weekly, watching my grandmother cry when I told them I crashed the truck. The words didn't even leave my mouth before she started crying. And now, it's not perfect, but I've mended those relationships with my parents. And my parents have recently gotten divorced. My grandfather died a few months back. I've stayed sober through all of it. When my grandfather died, I was there for my dad. It was the second time I've ever seen him cry. The first time was when he was convincing me to go to rehab because he didn't want to see his son die. I'm there for my mom now during this divorce. She's moving into a new house, and my brother is extremely angry with her. He's refusing to go see her new house. So I called her right after she did, or right after my brother did, and I told her that I would come see her new house when I got home. I actually called my mom, or I was talking to my mom this morning. One of the guys who I got close with at my rehab, who works there, he's the aftercare director. He's the one who hooked me up with this place, and he said he's having my mom talk to another parent of someone who's currently at rehab and telling them about the relationship that she has with their son now compared to the relationship that we had before. I'm attending my dream school in the fall. It's a military academy in Vermont. It's what I've always wanted to do. And I'm doing it sober. I can go on and on about how much different my life is than 9 months ago. And I really truly could just go on and on. But my life is amazing today, and that's all because I got sober. So that's all I got. Thanks for letting me share.
Okay, I'm having a hard time, Caden. That was touching. That was really touching, and I could so relate so much. Sorry. Thank you so much for your transparency and your honesty. That is always so mind-blowing for me, the gifts that recovery brings. And one of the big ones is that honesty and the service that you're doing tonight. So thank you. And I can see lots of love coming up from the reactions from our participants. So thank you very, very much. We have some really great questions that were asked ahead of time. And I know that I'm going to get to the one that was just asked in the chat. Talking about THC psychosis. And I think, Patrick, you've seen a lot of this. Can you talk about how it's presenting? And I can just say that, I know this guy is not research. I know that is not evidence, but we have so many clinicians like you, Patrick, that we work with who are just telling us so much about the shift toward cannabis-induced psychosis and aggression and different things that this high potency stuff is creating. And I hope I made it really clear when I was talking about the research that's been done. The studies, the surveys are one thing, asking people about their high potency use, but that doesn't tell us what the effects are clinically. Can you just talk about what you've seen in your practice?
Sure. So it's really interesting. So earlier in my career, I would see something called amphetamine-induced psychosis because of the intense stimulatory effect, and sometimes the the break from reality caused by amphetamine use. Sometimes that would trigger either a freestanding amphetamine-induced psychosis, meaning that's only related to the amphetamine use, or it would potentiate somebody who has some thought disorder, like a schizophrenia or something like that. It would kind of put them over the edge into that kind of state, like a fugue. So it really was not until the last 10 years that I started personally seeing clients presenting with cannabis or THC-induced psychosis, which really looks pretty much the same as an amphetamine-induced psychosis. So now it's really just under this heading of a substance-induced psychosis. So what that looks like is a couple of things. One is that person presents with psychotic features while they're under the influence, and they might be having delusions or paranoia or seeing things, hearing things, some kind of break from reality happening. And it generally looks more like a stimulated manic type state. However, that's one presentation. Another presentation that also happens is it starts triggering, because the age of onset for schizophrenia and a lot of thought disorders is generally between 18 and 26. So it could be triggering some of those symptomatologies. Now, here's the deal. Sometimes when people get physically sober and stabilize, those symptoms they go away, right? That psychosis can self-resolve when the substance is taken out of the mix. Sometimes those symptoms persist for a period of time and then eventually go away. Sometimes that becomes a chronic state for people. Now, we don't necessarily know chicken or egg, what's causing what, because of the comorbidity and the co-occurrence of those, but we do see an increased presentation with psychotic disorders with especially the increased potency of THC. So unfortunately, either there's an increased risk factor for thought disorders, or we're getting better at diagnosing it, and or THC is potentiating some of these psychotic episodes and or pushing people over the line into a thought disorder or a schizophrenic type presentation. So it's pretty scary because we really don't know what's causing that and if that's going to self-resolve once people get physically sober. The treatment kind of looks the same as stabilize and get people off the substances and see what the presentation is. 5, 10, 30 days, 40 days into treatment, you get more of an accurate diagnosis. The other thing is sometimes when people have disordered thinking, they go underground because it's embarrassing and shame-based and they don't want to feel different and they don't want to feel like there's something wrong with them. So a lot of times people underreport. their symptoms, and it's really hard to get an accurate reflection of what's going on. So I don't want to go too far into that, but it's a pretty tough thing to tease out. There are some really good tests once somebody's physically sober for a while that have like kind of lie indicators in there to see if somebody's accurately reporting whether they have a stable thought disorder diagnosis. That's a long-winded answer, but
Well, yeah, there's still a lot to learn, obviously, but I appreciate that. Yeah, it can look a lot of different ways. So someone mentioned that they had just heard about distress tolerance earlier this week for the first time, and you mentioned that, Patrick. Can you talk more about that? And I wonder too, if Kaden, if you find that relatable at all, and I'll let you start, Patrick. Talk about
so yeah, I mean, I think one of the correlates. One of the things that's actually correlates strongly with good mental health is distress tolerance, meaning the ability to hold two seemingly disparate perspectives at the same time, to be able to see both sides of an argument, or to be able to hold your own feelings on both sides of a thing. Like, I didn't get that promotion at work, or I'm not, maybe in the popular crowd at school, and I'm a good kid and I'm liked by my parents and I have some good friends and whatever, right? Like there's some stress on the system. And is that person able to come to some homeostasis with that, come to some kind of middle ground with that for themselves? Or does that issue become highly dysregulatory and interfere with their ability to be successful? So part of really good mental health is being able to hold kind of both sides of an argument, or hold two things at the same time. And THC specifically decreases people's distress tolerance, or their ability to hold things that are kind of uncomfortable. And how do you deal with that? And how do you persist in advocating for yourself, moving yourself forward? So that's my big concern with THC, is it really decreases people's ability to stick through and do hard things and persist and kind of get to the bottom of things for themselves and resolve some things for themselves. As you know, life is hard. And when we accept that it's hard, it's not so hard. But when we suffer under the delusion that it should be easy, it's really, really, really hard. So anyway, I'll put it over to Caden.
I mean, yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head. I was completely incapable of handling any level of stress. The most minor things would set me off, and I'd say, blanket, I gotta go smoke weed. Whether it was getting in trouble with my parents, I just get handed this big assignment, and rather than actually taking the time to do the assignment, I would just go smoke weed as if that was going to solve my problems. I was always looking for the instant gratification. I was never capable of actually sticking through something that was hard. Kind of like you talked about the resilience of it. I had zero resilience. Anytime you put something mildly hard in front of me, I chose the instant gratification over the long-term gratification. And now, like, what you said something at the end there too, I wanted to comment on. What's your words?
I wasn't listening to myself. No, I'm just kidding. About being able to persevere and get to the bottom of what's underneath a thing, as opposed to just a surface level answer to what's
yeah, it's essentially what I did. Is I chose the surface level gratification, the thing that would make me happy in the short term rather than the long term. Yeah, I was in complete and utter full flight from all of my problems. And to be honest, there wasn't many severe problems. I've had harder problems in sobriety than I did in my addiction. But in my addiction, I had no idea how to handle them. Whereas in sobriety, I now know how to handle things in a healthy way. I accept my emotions. That's another thing too. Like I said, I wanted to go to the military, and I had this idea in my head that, military were hard. We, talk about your emotions. It's also just kind of how I was raised with my father. Like I said, I've seen him cry twice in my entire life. He didn't really show emotions. And that's how I always thought I had to be. I was completely I was trying to run away from my head, run away from my emotions, my feelings. I hated them. They made me feel weak. They made me feel uncomfortable. Like I said, I was constantly looking for to be accepted by other people. So I was in full flight from myself. Couldn't handle the stress at all.
Thanks for that. And Caden, there's a question in the chat specifically for you. How are you handling the freshman initiation or the pressures to attend parties as a freshman? Is there a sober community at the school? And do you think that it's replicated in a lot of colleges and universities?
So I'll say, so this is my first semester here. I didn't come in the fall semester. This is my first semester of college ever. And so like I said, I'm living in a sober house currently, but this is one of 4 houses. So I live with 15 sober dudes. The house up the street, which they call the flagship house, that's the house that you go to out of rehab or, off the streets, quote unquote. That one has 28 people in it. And then there's another place a little bit further down the road. That one has, I believe, 14 in it too. So I have roughly a community of 60, 70 people, whatever that is, sober, surrounding me. Plus, I don't really want to get into this, but I'm in AA. And for those of you that don't know what that is, it's Alcoholics Anonymous. And I have a whole bunch of connections. It's essentially therapy for addicts and alcoholics. It's a lot more than that, but that's in very simple terms. And I have a massive connection of probably 500 contacts in my phone that I could reach out to for help whenever I need to. Like I said, when I was talking about how I now cope with my emotions, not only do I accept them, but when I'm struggling with them, I reach out to other people. I don't try and think my way through my thoughts anymore, because that did not work out well for me in the past. So back to your question a little bit. I don't go to parties. Most of my friends from school are in the gym. I work out a lot. And yeah, I don't go to parties, but like I said, this house that I live in currently, it's an old frat house, and there's quite literally a frat right there across the street, right there across the street. There's like 2 more down here, and then frat row is right here. So I'm constantly surrounded by people drinking, smoking. As you know, it's 420. I guarantee I'm gonna go step outside. It's gonna reek of weed. And it's not, I'm not going to say it's easy, but I'm not going to say it's hard either. Because I have this community of people around me who are constantly supporting me. And also, I went into my freshman year with a little bit of sober time under my belt. I will say I know a lot of people who are getting sober in their freshman year. I know a lot of people who have gone through college. I know a lot of people in the middle of college, whatever it may be, that are trying to get sober. It's definitely a different experience, but it is absolutely possible. And so I go to Westchester, and the company that owns these sober houses is a big presence in this area. So there's a huge community of sober people here. But yes, it's all over the country. All over the country. I guarantee you could find, if the school itself does not have a specific sober house, which a lot of them do, especially the larger ones, I guarantee you'll be able to find some sort of living in that area for sober people. And once again, if not, like, I actually know for a fact, the school I'm going to in the fall, it's a very small school. It's in the middle of nowhere, Vermont. It's like 3,000 people. They don't have sober living there, nor am I allowed to do it because military stuff. But I don't want to bring it back to AA, but like, those are the people that I reach out to in those situations. And there is a way of getting in communication with those people. So whether there's a physical sober house or not, there is always a community around me. Whether I'm physically next to them or not, they're a call away. And I guarantee you that there is a way of meeting up with them very, very easily.
Connection is so important. I'm so glad you said that. Thank you for that. And there are lots to answer the last part of that question, there are many collegiate recovery programs around the country that are, there's ARHE, I think is the acronym for, I have to look it up. I'll make sure it's on the follow-up page, but there are great collegiate recovery programs. It's so important to have that support. And I love that you are in that network of all those other sober dudes that you call them. Those are like great. And we are actually at 8:32, which I cannot believe how quickly this went. Patrick, am I allowed to ask you just one more question?
Of course.
Okay, so I think this is a really important one, and it is, how appropriate is it for a 16-year-old to use medical marijuana for anxiety?
If
How appropriate, did I say that right? How appropriate is it for a 16-year-old to use medical marijuana?
Okay, good question. So, I think that there are much more efficacious research-based medications for anxiety, especially for a 16-year-old. It would not be in my top 10. So I always think about, is somebody pursuing this course of action because it's best practice or because it's popular with the consumer? So I do think obviously people have to be willing to use an appropriate medication, but to be very direct, I don't think it's the most efficacious. There's all the other risk factors, but let's leave the risk factors out of it. I don't think it's actually an effective medication for treating anxiety, especially for a 16-year-old. And there's lots of other things that I would suggest, like family therapy and or addressing the underlying roots of the anxiety beyond just a medication. But THC would not be high on the list of medications to use.
I'll go ahead and hop in on that real quick.
Yeah, please.
Again, I don't know the medical science behind any of it, but I think that's playing an extremely dangerous game using marijuana as a anxiety medication at 16. You know, you talked about that slide that you overuse or whatever, but under the age of 18, the using mood or mind altering substances is extremely high risk. And to be quite frank too, if I knew that that was an option at 16, I would have absolutely started telling my parents I have an anxiety, I need to smoke weed. I would have abused it just like I abused everything else. Sad matter of the fact is that when you are in addiction, like I said, you don't care who you hurt. And if lying to a doctor, lying to my parents, lying to my peers is what it takes for me to get the drug I want, that's what I'm going to do.
Wow. Appreciate that so much, Caden. Wow, you were just amazing. Patrick, as always, you're the best. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody for being with us. And really, again, Caden, I'm so grateful that you were with us, and I hope we stay connected because you got a lot of potential. I think you're an amazing person. So glad we met you. Thank you, everyone. Judy just put the survey link in the chat again, but that will come up when the program ends. This recording will be available in the morning on that follow-up page /cannabis. So thank you, everybody. Have a really good evening. Thanks so much.